Thanks for joining us. This is Dallas Woodhouse with Carolina Journal. And joining me today is Ryan Burrell, the owner and founder of Spry Strategies, a research and polling firm located in Knoxville, Tennessee, but they are one of the most successful polling firms in all of the Southeast. And they do a lot of polling in North Carolina. And Ryan, we're here today to talk about a poll of Republican primary voters, likely primary voters in the 2022 Republican primary for U.S. Senate. Tell us about that poll and tell us what you found.
Yeah, Dallas, thanks for having me this morning. We had a really solid poll in terms of scientific methodology, and we were looking at the Republican base. So we did 2 out of 4 Republican voters considering 14, 16, 18, and 20. We added a couple thousand primary voters, correct. Added a couple thousand newly registered as well. And we did a mixed mode hybrid method survey with more of a traditional live landline IVR, which has proven to be very accurate in the age of Trump, particularly, and then also online mobile.
So we had landline calls, we had mobile calls, and we had sort of an online component.
That's right. We had 500 landlines and 200 cell phones to be exact.
So over 700 respondents. Okay, so tell us a little bit. It looks like you polled 3 candidates for U.S. Senate, Ted Budd, of course, Mark Walker, who joined first, and former Governor Pat McCrory. The poll was conducted right after Mark Robinson announced he was not going to run, but right before Ted Budd said he was. But we at Carolina Journal had reported for a while he was going to run. What did those results show between those 3 men?
Well, I'll tell you, I think going into it, we changed the script the night that Mark Robinson announced, and we were in the field with the final script the following day. McCrory, as expected, is extremely strong with the base. I think that the balance that he had with all demographics was exceeded my expectations, even though I thought he'd be in the lead in a big way, and maintained some popularity in Charlotte, which, in the public spotlight as Charlotte's mayor, as governor of North Carolina, and then the face of conservative organizations for many years. And then now on the radio, Pat has really remained in the game. And so he had a substantial lead, even though it's early.
Give us those numbers.
Sure. Yeah, so the primary ballot head-to-head, we had Pat McCrory at 40.15%, Ted Budd at 4.89%, Mark Walker at 10.56%, and the undecided is at 44.39%, which, believe it or not, is low undecided to be this early. So.
Oh, sure. I think the one thing that that has to be pointed out in Mr. McCrory's favor is that it appeared from the poll, it's not that the voters are just familiar with him, which they are. Only 3% of the respondents indicated they didn't know who Mr. McCrory was. But they give him both high favorability ratings and high ratings based on their cumulative view as his time of governor from 2013 to 2017.
That's right. He has exceptional favorability numbers and AIM-ID numbers with 40.36, very favorable, somewhat favorable, 32.19, and then his unfavorables are right at 16%, which is absolutely amazing numbers. Again, to be, in the public spotlight for so long, that's going to make it difficult for anybody to win this race against Pat. When you look at Mark Walker and Ted Budd's number, their combined numbers do not equal Pat McCrory's favorability related ratings. For example, Ted Budd, very favorable 12.53, somewhat favorable 17.62, somewhat unfavorable 5.75, and very unfavorable 3.12. So although they're not bad, he would have a tremendous amount of work to do. And the
The
other
fact
thing
is,
now,
while a lot of us activists know and think highly of Congressman Budd, outside of his district, he's not very well known. 47% of the people in the poll indicated they had never heard of Mr. Budd.
that's correct. And, with Mark Walker, it's very similar, although, Mark has very good favorable to unfavorable ratio, with 18.83 very favorable, 19.29 somewhat favorable. And his unfavorable numbers are around 10%, which is pretty strong. The problem is that Ted Budd and Mark Walker are duking it out in the Greensboro, Winston-Salem DMA. That gives
both of their districts are in the Greensboro television market, and that's what the DMA is.
That's right.
And of course, your poll showed that Mr. Walker polled the best with the most conservative vote.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that wasn't surprising, although, if you look at Ted Budd's press release, his announcement is hammering that America First agenda right away. And I expect both of those guys to really closely align themselves with Trump, and whoever Trump gives his endorsement and they can tap into the fundraising, one of those guys can make it a lot closer. But
let's talk about the part of your poll. You asked folks how similar or dissimilar they would like to see the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate from North Carolina be to the former president. Tell us about that part of the poll.
Well, I think that as expected, the America First agenda is captivated the Republican base. The Republican Party is on board with that as well. They're still carrying that mantle, and for good reason. You're thinking about the open U.S. Senate seat in 2022 when it comes to the Republican primary, how similar or different would you like the Republican nominee to be former President Donald Trump? 54.09. Similar in tone and style, but different on the issues, 4.41. Different in tone and style, but similar in the issues, 24.56. Very different in style, tone, and on the issues, only 13.46. The interesting part about that, Dallas, is, Dallas, you wanted to sample right-leaning independents. So, normally in a Republican primary poll, we're not identifying a political party. We did in this time, so 29% of our respondents are independents that vote in Republican primaries. They make up almost all of this 13.46.
Brian, it indicates that while, about half the voters want a candidate who is similar in style and demeanor and tone and the issues, there is a bigger population that in total either likes the issues themselves. In other words, it seems like there is room to run being very similar to Mr. Trump. There's also room to run a little different than Mr. Trump, but there's not room to run away from the America First policy.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, 82% or so want that America First agenda. Again, if we would have tested hard Republican primary voters, I would expect that to be about 96%. And I think the very similar in tone and style, when you read between the lines, people want a hard driving candidate that is confident and does not play by the swamp's rules. That's kind of what I read in between the lines on that one.
So a couple of other issues. You went into the field right after Mark Robinson indicated he would not run for U.S. Senate. The poll shows that voters, again, these are likely Republican primary voters, what we would call the base, both give him high approval numbers as lieutenant governor, but also are pleased that he did not run for U.S. Senate.
Yeah, that's correct. I think that Mark Robinson made the right decision. Mark's name ID and job approval were much higher than I thought. But as expected, and I think a lot of this is, because of Pat McCrory being one of the opponents. You take Pat out, and I think the Robinson decision becomes a little less murky, if you will. But Mark Robinson is 55.5 agree that he should not have run for the United States Senate, continued on as lieutenant governor, and 14.2 do not agree. Then 30.3 say unsure. And the North Carolina Republican base has gotten savvy over the years, and I think that's a to be determined type answer right there, where they want to see a little more on the three candidates that are in, and just don't know enough about Mark Robinson.
A couple of other questions. I'll run through these quickly as our time is coming to short. Remember, you can read Carolina Journal that has two stories, one on the Senate race and one on some other issues. The poll indicates about 2/3 of North Carolina Republicans believe North Carolina is on the wrong track. Among their concerns are both election security and fraud, as well as a loss of liberty and because of big government overreach. So one of the questions that you put forward was a question about moving the mail ballot deadline, which is currently 3 days after the election, up until Election Day. Republican primary voters strongly behind that.
Yeah, that's right. And not surprising, when you look at the wrong track answers. What's interesting about that is crime and public safety is a lot lower in North Carolina than it is in every other state that I've polled this year. And I've polled 31 states so far. So people are very concerned about election fraud and their civil liberties getting stomped on by Governor Cooper and his, Biden-like shutdown mentality.
Yeah. But the poll question about moving the ballot deadline was overwhelming. That Republicans favor moving the deadline up. Republicans are also appear to have their base with them to continue to oppose Medicaid expansion and to affirmatively look to grow the charter school and school choice movement.
Yeah, there's a lot of agreement in the base on Medicaid expansion. Somewhat oppose 18.01, strongly oppose 45.8. People are very on board, and there's hardly any unsure, no opinions, only 7.95, which is a pretty extraordinarily low number right there. And
I think it shows there that the governor, who has been on this kick for now over 5 years, has been unable to move people in North Carolina on the issue other than his base. Now, on to school choice, Republicans have generally backed the school choice movement. This was a question about funding. The question was, do you support the Republican belief that we ought to put more money into school choice and charter schools, or the governor's position that we should cut school choice funding? Overwhelming numbers, and I don't think it's a surprise for the school choice movement in the Republican Party. But I think these numbers are even stronger because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Dallas. And I think if we did a general election sample, you're going to see a lot of independents and moderate Democrats that have gotten on board with the school choice issue as a result of the education policy that really was a disaster for Governor Cooper and the left.
One final thought, real quick. While this poll was being conducted, Speaker of the House Tim Moore announced that North Carolina, the legislature would not advance the Save Our Women's Sports Act. We asked the question of, or you did as the pollster, do you support a bill that would limit, that would prevent biological males from playing on sports teams reserved just for women, while keeping in mind that some people say that is unfair to transgender teens? While it had majority support at about 54%, there was a strong opposition in the Republican primary to that topic as well. I believe it was about 40%.
Yes, and this is, I'm polling this issue, and just did one in South Dakota for Chrissy Nome and Manchin and Cinema to try to get their support. And this is lower in North Carolina. This support is larger in most every state that I've polled outside of any blue states. And I think what you see here, Dallas, is a HB2 hangover. That issue is really relevant, and we took a look at some questions that involve that in a separate project, and it's obvious that people are still there's still some of that HB2 hangover running in the Republican electorate, and then also I think in the General Assembly, those guys are aware that that issue needs to stay in the past, if you will.
I think what the General Assembly learned through the HB2 situation is that it is virtually impossible to legislate through hypotheticals.
Absolutely.
And that, if young biological males who are transgender start getting into women's sports and causing a serious issue, that the legislature is more equipped to deal with it once they have a problem rather than the potential problem. Well, I invite you to read more about Ryan Burrell's polling on carolinajournal.com. We hope that we'll be doing this again, Ryan. If you're interested in finding Ryan, you can go to sprystrategies.com or Google Spry Strategies. You can look him up. Ryan, thank you for your time today, and we'll be checking back with you again. I'm Dallas Woodhouse with Carolina Journal.